So the next person we have up is Maina. He's a executive director of social justice leadership, and I spent a year in the somatics and social justice collaborative, really thinking deep around the theory around transformative organizing in another in kind of a related area. But if you guys want to dive into it, social justice leadership put out a pamphlet called Transformative Organizing Towards Liberation of Self and Society. Right? And some of you may have been to transformative organizing 101, 102s that they're holding, right? So this question that Cindy has of how do you actually go deeper and transform self, and what does that look like when looking out and thinking about it in the direction towards where we want society? And so in that, I would like Netha to address the crowd.
Thanks.
Woo.
A lot of people there. That's good. So good afternoon. Well, first I want to thank Eric and the Labor Community Strategy Center for hosting this thing, and really for everybody here for coming, because I think this is going to be a really exciting discussion. And so I'll try and speak relatively briefly so that we can get into it. So just a word about me. So I run an organization called Social Justice Leadership. That we're a movement building organization, and we work with organizers and organizations to really try and raise the collective level of what we're bringing to transformative change in this country. My background is as a community organizer, which I did in Los Angeles as sort of a sister organization to the Mary Bonds. Wow.
It was door knocking, trying to be this time.
Wow. It's a trip. So I was an organizer in LA for this organization called Agenda. It became Scope, organizing black and brown folks around social and economic justice issues. And so for about 10 years. And so that experience doing that work in LA and working alongside the Strategy Center during that time, I feel like there were a lot of similarities and compatibility, and so as Steve said, I'm really grateful that Eric is beginning to codify some of this stuff, because it just doesn't exist, right? Like there are pockets of folks who are experimenting with, I think, really creative and new models for organizing that are really on the cutting edge. And not enough of us actually document it and write about it. And so I'm really grateful that Eric has done this little pamphlet and will continue to do the writing work around these kinds of models that, to me, I think are really the leading edge of organizing work in this country. So I guess I'll start by raising the question for Eric and for the crowd, and it's a question that I would say that I'm grappling with and we're all grappling with, and that is, how do we make a process happen? How do we cause to happen a process that transforms society and transforms people? So that transforms the structures of society and it transforms the people in it. Or I would even say, how do we create a process that transforms individual people as much as it transforms society? And the reason I say that is because I think one of the challenges of organizing as it exists, as we have done it thus far, is that our focus is very much on transforming the structures of society. Right? And really the history of community organizing in this country is about the fight for changing the conditions around people. Right? So we're trying to transform the structures and systems around people through all the very good fights that we're doing. And the assumption is that if we change the conditions around people, that's actually going to allow people themselves to change and to live good lives. And one of the things that I think that misses is that it misses that all of us are not immune from the toxicity of oppression. Right? We're not immune from the toxicity of capitalism. And so believing that simply changing the conditions around any of us, whether it's a person or a community, change those conditions, that's going to remove the toxicity of oppression from us, I think is some place where we've fallen short. and an area that we need to work on. And from my perspective, right, the work that we've been doing, all of us have been doing, and I'm going to make a lot of generalizations because there's just a little bit of time. And I can't run down the list of everybody doing things differently. But the work that most of us have been doing for the last several generations has that kind of framework. There are some exceptions to it, but it has that kind of framework of let's change the structures of society and assume that that's going to change the people themselves. And to me, that represents something of a gamble. Right? And the gamble is that if we change the structures of society, we're gambling that will remove the toxicity of oppression from people. And to me, it's a gamble because the future is so unknown. Let's believe the future is unknown, and it could cut that way, or it could cut the toxicity that's in us actually undermines the structural changes that we make, right? Because capitalism teaches us very bad things, and it's deeply in us. It's deeply in us. And from our view, if we don't go directly at it, if we simply change the conditions around us, we're going to carry those things into the new society that we create. And when we carry those things into the new society, if we're allowed to continue to do what we do, we will undermine it, and it will begin to crumble. And so to me, that's a big gamble that we have been playing, and from my perspective, one of the reasons that we haven't been as effective as we need to be. Now, there's obviously the right and their forces and all that stuff, but simply within the realm of what we can control and what we can do. And Steve brought up a great example of the liberated zones in Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau. And there's also like great examples of folks who are doing like a prefigurative work, in my view, that is about trying to change our practices, right? Not just change structures, but change our practices. Anyway, so that's one of the big gambles that I think that we face. So that's sort of one question: how do we transform society? How do we have a process that both transforms society and people, and in fact transforms people as much as it transforms society? That's one big piece. The second big piece that I want to focus on is, so if we're clear that that it's important to transform people and to root out the bad things that capitalism has taught us and the things that we continue to reify and replicate in the system itself, if it's clear that we need to transform those things out of us, what is required to do that? And what is really required to transform individuals? So at Social Justice Leadership, we say it starts with us as like people who are committed to changing society, like organizers and trainers and all of us. It starts with us. And our view is that we have to, like us revolutionaries are pretty good at thinking about political ideology and strategy. We devote a lot of time to that. We're very rigorous at that. But we really have almost no rigor in the realm of our own personal transformation. And so we need to bring that same level of attention and rigor to ourselves the way we bring it to how we think about changing society. And I would say that we are mostly blind to the level and depth of transformation that's needed within us. So what we'll do is we'll look at society, we'll say, oh, it's all messed up, politically it's all backwards, people are being oppressed, exploited, and those kinds of things. And so we'll try and take up, so we'll do our political work that way. Then we'll try and take up some personal practices that are really aligned with our political work, right? So we'll boycott this, and we won't, buy these kinds of sodas and those kinds of things, and that's all great. But capitalism just gets in us at a much more profound level, much deeper than that, and much deeper than simply the choices we make around what it is we want to purchase, right? So, like purchasing, just the notion of purchasing is something that is a feature of capitalism that I think we completely take for granted, right? So we're going to purchase a homegrown soda instead of purchasing the soda that's made by the big factory. Right? So even the notion of purchasing is an example of how it is so deeply ingrained in us. So the question of what is required to transform us, I would say we're mostly blind to that whole realm of work, and because of that, I would say that our approach to personal transformation is frankly reformist, even neoliberal, at the level of ourselves, right? And if we look at it that way, we would never stand for that kind of approach, right? We would not allow ourselves to take a neoliberal and reformist approach to changing society. So why do we allow ourselves to take that kind of approach when it comes to transforming ourselves?
Thank you.
Finish up. And anyway, so that's, to me, those big questions. What is the process for transforming people as much as we transform society is a question I want to put out to everybody, because I think it's going to require all of us to really figure it out, and not just figure it out through thinking, but figure it out through practice. And then it's more of a challenge of how do we step up? How do we step up to really engage with what is required to transform each of us at a deeply personal level? Thank you.
Made for the first ever Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. But yes. But that work took years, right? It's 10 years of building that. And that's been summarized in an article for Organizing Upgrade, Organizing with Love, Lessons from the New York Domestic Workers Bill of Rights campaign. And you know, IGEN has often pushed us to think about how do we build a movement that's very deep in the base, that actually brings real folks, right? And that reaches, and then grounded in the left, but reaches out to other sectors. Because if we're ever gonna transform society, we've gotta transform people towards a transformative society. So with that, IGEN, I want you to dive in. All right. Woo. These friends, it's like this is your life. So I just want to start by asking how many of you have been moved by the work of the Labor Community Strategy Center. So I think we should give a round of applause. And how many of you have felt like you've learned important lessons about organizing from Eric Mann? How many of you think Eric Mann should finish his book? Done already. Okay, done already. Just kidding. So I'm IGEN, and I've been organizing immigrant women workers since 1996. Can you hear me in the back? All right, immigrant women workers since 1996. And throughout all of those years, actually, I have learned at really important junctures lessons about transformative organizing from Eric and the work of the Strategy Center. And I think one of the most important things that he's always focused on, that Nyada also focuses on in a different way, is the importance of practice, right? That you have to get out there and do the work, right? You have to get out there, get on the doors, talk to people, get on the bus, and engage. And there's no way around it. There's no better teacher than the practice itself. That's right. And that's also the case around the personal development work that I think Nyada talked about, which is that there's a lot, that deep work that we have to do on the personal level. It takes commitment, dedication, rigor. It's also a deep, deep practice. And so the importance of practice is something that I just want to lift up, and I think that one of my favorite points in Eric's pamphlet is point number 5, which is transformative organizing becomes truly transformative in the course of battle, right? Transformative organizing becomes truly transformative in the course of battle. And I think that the way that when I think about transformative organizing, I think about change on multiple levels. There's the change that has to happen, the change that you're trying to make in the system, right? To change the system, the way that it works, the way that it's unequal, the way that it oppresses us. You're also trying to transform the movement so that you're more powerful and more dynamic as a movement. You're trying to transform your organization to be more impactful, to be stronger. And you're trying to transform the relationships between people who are involved in the work that you're doing. And you're trying to transform yourself, right? You're trying to learn, you're trying to grow, you're trying to be better in the world, be better at what you do. To me, the best container and vehicle for these types of transformations to happen and all at once in different ways is through campaigns, through fights, right? Some of the fights that we've all been involved in, I'm sure each of you can remember like a defining fight that really kind of taught you a bunch about organizing. I think that that's probably the case for all of us. And I have this metaphor that I don't know how it's going to go over in this room, but I'm going to try it, which is that great campaigns are like great love affairs. So I have a question. What happens to you? What happens to you when you fall in love? Tell me. Huh? It's all consuming, right? What else? What else happens to you when you fall in love?
Commitment.
Right. You get more committed. You lose perspective. Tammy,
I was going to say you gain perspective.
you gain perspective.
That's right.
All right. So the point is, huh?
You have a one-track mind.
Okay, exactly. You have a one-track mind. It's all consuming. Have you ever had the experience where you feel like you're completely overwhelmed and busy and your schedule's completely packed, and then you fall in love and all of a sudden all this time and space to go to the movies and go out for dinner, and it's like that. It's like suddenly the impossible feels possible, right? So great campaigns are like that, and a lot of what we need is that feeling that things change, deep change, big change is really possible. And so a great campaign for me has been the campaign for the Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights in New York. It's a campaign that's been 6 years long in the making, and we are in this really important moment where yesterday the governor, the Senate, and the Assembly came to the table for the first time with the full intention of creating a bill that would get signed in the coming weeks. And what it'll do is it'll provide basic rights and protections that oftentimes you find in a collective bargaining agreement to about 200,000 mostly undocumented women of color who work as nannies, housekeepers, and caregivers for the elderly in New York. And we're part of a national alliance, and so the California Domestic Workers Alliance just introduced the California Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. And so it's building, and we're looking at Colorado next year, and so it's really an exciting time for us. And I think because we're talking about the practice, I just wanted to give an example of how we're trying to really practice transformative organizing in the context of the social forum, building off of some of this work that we've done. So we're doing some different levels of work. One is that we're bringing together domestic workers for the National Domestic Workers Alliance Congress. So we've got 33 member organizations in 14 cities, and we're all meeting together. And what we're trying to do is build in a culture that's a feminist culture, that's a transformative culture. So every morning before we start our program, we actually have Angel Kyoto Williams, who's at the Center for Transformative Change, come in and lead a centering exercise so that everybody can be grounded really in who they want to be, what they want to bring to the work, and in their sense of purpose as we go into the day. And then we go off and we do our stuff about what do we want to build for domestic workers? How are we going to build the power of domestic workers? How are we going to organize the 2.5 million domestic workers that are in the United States? And then we're part of this process called the Excluded Workers Congress, which happened yesterday. It was the first time that domestic workers, taxi drivers, day laborers, guest workers, formerly incarcerated workers, lots of workers who've been excluded by the system came together to define a new vision for the human right to organize and a new framework for labor laws in this country that's rooted in human rights, that's about our economy today, the reality of what it is today, not something that was born of 30 years, an economy of 30 years ago, but for the 21st century. And then tomorrow, we're going to be part of the Inter-Alliance Dialogue, Enough is Enough People's Movement Assembly, as we come together with all different struggles in the working class, things that define our future, climate, jobs, immigration enforcement, key campaigns that are about the future of humanity and the planet that we need to unite around broadly, right? And so we're going to be a part of that as domestic workers. So we're trying our best to connect the dots and move everything forward. And it's a work in progress. All of you know organizing is really, really hard. But I think with all of this great theory that's being brought forward and in the practice of it, we're actually moving towards bigger, better change, much more than we've ever been. And yeah. So up next, I have Patrisse Cullors. And I remember Patrisse because when I came to the Strategy Center in 2001, I was in the National School for Strategic Organizing. And